Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Thank you so much for joining this edition of the Notion at Work webcast. I am William Nutt of Nutt Labs, and we are an integrated digital strategy firm and Notion consultancy, typically based in New York, but still quarantining down in North Carolina. And I also run the independent website Notion VIP, where I publish tools and insights about all things Notion. You can access that at notion.vip. So before we dive in today, do you mind confirming that you can hear me loud and clear? I wouldn't want to be speaking on mute or anything like that. Homesick Mac, you're always a reliable source. Nikki, Harry, can you hear me okay? All righty, James, thank you so much. There's a little bit of a lag there, so that's always an awkward way to start, but we will keep on keeping on here. So today we are going to discuss project management in Notion. And after knowledge management, project management is really kind of the foremost use of Notion. Notion's unique combination of features makes it a particularly useful platform for planning and managing your projects. You can view each project with its tasks, but also with its associated documents and resources and notes and meetings and contacts, among other useful information associated with the project. And then you can display your projects within contextual dashboards. So within your client pages, for example, you can display only the projects associated with that, with each client. And if you have team and department pages, you can display only the projects for those teams and departments. And then individuals can have filtered views of the projects that they're associated with and the tasks that are assigned to them. So these are all kind of unique capabilities of Notion. And today we're going to construct a framework for a streamlined project management system that leverages these powerful capabilities. And this framework, I've made it available as a template that you can duplicate. It's available for pay what you want. So we'll include that link within the YouTube video description of this webcast recording. And then if we circulate a follow-up email, we'll include a link to a template there as well. And then on Notion VIP, there's also a text post that details the development of this streamlined system, and it'll actually go into even more detail than I will today, and it's available in a text format, so you can reference that and use the template, and then you'll have this webcast recording as well. It'll be available on YouTube probably within the next 24 hours or so. So as you practice this and implement these strategies independently, you'll have plenty of resources. And then I'm always available to answer any questions if you just tweet at me. So let's dive in. If you have tuned in to any other editions of this webcast or used any of my guides on Notion VIP, you have very likely seen that I have one foremost recommendation when it comes to organizing a Notion workspace. And that is to centralize your information within master databases and then create contextual views of that information within dashboards. So I have this bulletproof methodology that utilizes this kind of fundamental principle and dives into kind of the best practices for implementing it. And anybody who's seen this before, you may be interested to know that I'm working on a refreshed version. So I look forward to releasing kind of a version 2.0 here in the next few weeks. But nonetheless, that underlying principle of centralizing information in master databases and creating contextual views of that information, it holds firmly. But today we are going to focus on a few specific master databases. That bulletproof approach includes a variety of master databases that I recommend for a business use. Today, we're going to focus on projects, tasks, and resources. So your projects database is going to include, it's pretty straightforward, it's going to include the initiatives that typically have a defined outcome and a defined timeline, and they're completed through a series of tasks. So you're going to have an independent master database for tasks as well. You'll have all of your tasks for all projects will exist in one master database of tasks, and we'll use Notion's relation property to connect each task to its prospective project, and that's going to offer us a variety of different benefits. And then your resources database is going to include all of the materials that you reference in order to complete your tasks and ultimately your project. So that could include project briefs, it could include branding guidelines for your own company or for your clients. It could include research and analysis, comparative analyses. And these resources will also be related to projects in a way that will allow you to display filtered views of them within your projects. So we're going to spend less time on these other two databases, but I will reference them. So let me briefly describe what I'm talking about. So in a buckets database, if you're familiar with the para methodology, which is often adapted within Notion workspaces, you can think of buckets as areas, or in the case of August Bradley, he's got his pillars, pipelines, and views approach, and these would be like the pillars. But basically, the buckets database is going to include the high-level categories of your work. It's a way of classifying all of your other information, a way of classifying your projects, a way of classifying your resources. And they'll typically align with the internal departments and teams within your company. So you could have a finance bucket and a marketing bucket and a product development bucket. And it'll likely also include your client. So each client will be a bucket because you're going to want to categorize all of this other information by client as well. So I do recommend a buckets or an areas or a pillars database for every workspace. And then this meetings and events database is pretty straightforward, but it's just representative of the other databases that you would have in your workspace. So I do recommend having a meetings and events database, but I also recommend a context database and a company's database. But this meetings and events database kind of represents all of those other databases that you might want to relate to your projects. So you get the idea here that you have these master databases of information, and they're all interrelated in a way that's going to allow you to display them contextually. So with that sort of context, let's jump into the actual development of this system. So first, we're going to, like I said, we're going to be creating these projects, tasks, and resources database, and then referencing these other ones. So I've created this kind of blank workspace page for us. And so the first page that we're going to create is going to be our projects database. So I'm going to create a new page. I'm going to name it projects, and I'm going to make it a table. And so this projects database, we're going to rename the title property to project. And then we're going to want to have the time span of the project. So I'm going to rename this default tags property to time span and convert it to a date property. And then each project is likely to have a project manager in larger organizations, at least. So we will include a project manager property and make it a person property. And then for the other people associated with the project, we will include just a team property and also make it a person property so you can select the other team members. And what that's going to allow you to do is each of these team members are going to have their personal dashboards, and they'll be able to filter projects based on where they're included within either the project manager or the team properties. So much of these properties are about being able to establish these useful filters within these contextual dashboards. And so then the last property here I'm going to include is that bucket relation property. So this is where we have that existing buckets database. And we want to include this relation to that as a way of classifying, categorizing the projects, and then being able to create those filtered views. So that I'm creating a relation property here, and I'm going to include that buckets database. And I've included these underscores if you're curious about that, just to make them easily searchable when we create these relation properties. So if you're unfamiliar with relations and roll-up properties, they really are what makes Notion so uniquely powerful. So if you want to learn a little bit more about those, there's another post on Notion VIP specifically about that. And I also joined Marie Pullen for one of her office hours webcast where we dove into the power of relations and roll-up. So that is on Notion's YouTube channel. You can watch that. But generally speaking, what a relation does is it allows you to connect items in one database to items in another database. So each item in database A can connect to one or more items in database B, and that gives you the ability to do a lot with those relationships. And then a roll-up property is going to take those relations and pull in information. So any bucket that we connect to this project, we're going to be able to pull in information about that project. And you'll see exactly why that's useful here in this context. So that's our projects database. Let's go back to our little workspace page here. And we are loading. All right, and let's create another page. And this is going to be our tasks database. So once again, we will make this a table. Let's spell tasks correctly. We'll rename the title property to task. And then we are going to want assign each task to a person. So we will convert this property to a person property, and we will name it responsible, and we will spell that correctly as well. And then we are going to want a due date for the property. So we'll convert this to a date property and name it due date. And then we're also going to want a date for which the project or the task will actually be scheduled to be completed. Typically, that'll be assigned, that'll be populated by the person who's actually going to complete the task. And what August Bradley does that I absolutely love is he doesn't have a DUE date, or he does, but he also has a DO date. And that's a date property as well. So this allows you to identify when you're actually planning to complete the task, which is helpful. And then lastly, we're just going to add a complete property, a checkbox to indicate when the task has been completed. So that is our tasks database. And of course, these databases can include a variety of other properties that you may want in order to create useful filtered views of them. But we're just kind of doing the essentials here. And then lastly, we're going to create our resources database. And this one in particular will have a lot more properties than we'll populate here, but we're just doing the essentials. So we've got our resource property for the name of it. And then it's helpful to have a description for each resource, and you can make that just a text property. And then once again, we want to tie each resource to a bucket. So I'm going to convert this property to a relation property, name it bucket, and then choose that existing buckets database as the database that we want to establish the relation with. So with these core master databases created, what we can do is establish relationships among them. And we're going to, as I've said, that's going to allow us to create these useful contextual views of each one. And so first, we are going to want each task to be assigned to a project. So we'll go into our tasks database and we'll add a property called project, and we'll make it a relation property, and we're going to choose the project's database. But you know what? I'm going to add that helpful underscore to each of these databases so that we can search for them quickly when establishing these relations. So in our tasks database, we'll create this relation property, and we are going to choose the projects database, underscore projects, because I've got a lot in this workspace. So with this, we're able to tie each task to its respective project. So with resources, we already introduced the ability to relate each resource to a bucket, but we also want to relate each resource to a project. And in fact, each resource is likely to be related to more than one project. So we'll make this project plural, projects with an S, and this will also be a relation property. And once again, we'll choose our underscore projects database. And so having done that, if we go into our projects database, we're going to see reciprocal relation properties because it's a two-way relationship. So we connected tasks to projects, and we related resources to projects as well. And so these default names are undesirable, to say the least. So we will rename this resources relationship to resources, and then we'll rename tasks to tasks. So we are going to want to evaluate the progress of each project. And because the project, each one is going to be made up of a series of tasks, you can determine the percentage of tasks that have been completed, and that can be an indication of the status toward completing your project. So to do that, we're going to use a roll-up property, and we've already created the relationship between projects and tasks. So if we add a new property, a new roll-up property, and I'm going to name it progress, and I'm going to put in parentheses percentage, and you'll see why in a second. But I'm going to make this a roll-up property. And when you choose a roll-up property, what you do is you indicate the relation that you want to pull in content for, and then you're going to indicate the property from that related database that you want to actually pull in, and then you're going to determine what you want to do with it. So if I click within this roll-up property, I can choose the relation, and in this case, we're working with the tasks. And then the property within tasks we want to pull in is complete. We want to pull in that checkbox property for all of the tasks associated with this project. And if we keep show original, all that's going to do is to display a series of checked and unchecked checkboxes, which is not useful for us. But what Notion allows us to do is to calculate the percent checked, which is a really powerful feature. So once we have projects in place and tasks in place, and some of those tasks are completed as indicated by its checkbox property, we're going to see the percentage of the project that has been completed. Now, projects it's much nicer to display a visual progress bar rather than just a percentage number when you're tracking your project. So I'm not going to go into the details of creating a progress bar, but that is once again a post on Notion VIP that you can access, and it was also another edition of the Office Hours podcast or webcast that I joined Marie Pullen for. So definitely take a look at that if you're curious about creating progress bars. But for now, I'm just going to paste in the progress formula that's going to draw from the progress property and then generate the progress bar. So I'm sorry, I had it in place and then closed it. So let me just pull that up quickly. All right, I'm not positive if this is the correct formula, but oh, here it is. Okay. All right, so I'm just pasting in this formula, and this is not exactly the right formula, but it's going to work for us for now. So we have our progress bar in place here. And like I said, there are other resources for learning exactly how to do that. So having you created this progress bar property to indicate progress, we can just hide this percentage version of it. So we have all of our master databases created, and we have them related, and we're rolling up our percentage of checked checkboxes in order to indicate progress, and we are visualizing that progress through progress bars. So let's populate a little bit of information for us to work with. So the first one we'll populate will be just an initial project. So let me pull up some projects that I can just paste in here so we're not spending too much time on that. So I'm just going to paste in some information so we can focus on the real strategies here. So there is just one project for us to work with. And I'm going to unwrap this database to keep it a little bit cleaner looking. So you can see that we've populated this website project for our blue ribbon client, and that project has a time span. This date property is populated with a start date and an end date. We have a one person populated within the project manager property, and then a series of team members. So we have our project in place. Let's add some tasks associated with this project. So let me just copy a couple of tasks for this particular project. So we have pasted this series of tasks that would typically be associated with the development of a website. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to sort it by the DUE date so that it's a little bit nicer to look at. And then I'm going to do the same for just a few preliminary resources. And these are going to be some placeholder resources that would typically be associated with the development of a website. So with these preliminary tasks and resources in place, what we can do is establish the relation with the proper buckets and especially the proper projects. So for the resources, for example, with that project in place, we can now click into our projects property, which is a relation property. It's because it's related to our projects database, we can choose the project associated with the resource. So if you just do it for one, you can then copy it and paste it for all the others. So as I did previously, I'm going to unwrap these cells. And we're also going to want to associate the resources with the proper bucket. And remember, the bucket can also be the your areas or your pillars if you're using August Bradley's version. So we have each of these placeholder resources now associated with a project and associated with a bucket. So I'm going to go back into the tasks. And for each task, we're going to choose our placeholder project. So remember, if you do it once, you can then paste it for all the others. So if we now go into our projects database, we can see that the resources property, the relation property, and the task property is now populated with all of those items that we just related to it. So we're also going to want to relate this project to its proper bucket, which is going to be Sweet Green Restaurants. So remember, I also had that meetings and events database, and that was just going to use as an example of kind of all of the other information that you might associate with your project. So because we're going to use that, we want to add another relation property for meetings and events. And you would do this for contacts, you would do it for organizations, any of the other master databases that you want to tie into your projects, you would create a relation property for. So I'm going to make this a relation property, and I'm going to search for our underscore meetings and events database. And so then if we go back to our meetings and events database, we have that reciprocal property that was just created. So we could name that projects. And then for each blue ribbon instance, and of course, this is pre-populated. As I mentioned, I'm not going to spend as much time on this. We'll just add this website project that we're working with here. So now these two meetings are associated with the blue ribbon website project. So I'm going to pop back over to Crowdcast just to make sure I haven't lost everybody. I'm going to answer questions at the end. Sounds like there are no alarms going off, so I'm going to keep on keeping on. And so what we can do now that we have all of this information in place and all of these relationships established is we can go into our projects database. And when we open a project page, we want to see all of this information that's tied to the project. So, imagine that these tasks and these resources and these meetings and events and all these databases are filled with just an enormous volume of information, most of which is not associated with the respective project. When you open the project, you want to see only the items that are tied to the project. So the way that you do that is you're going to create linked databases that are filtered to show only the items that are related to this particular project. So in typically every instance, you're going to want to include the resources associated with the project. So you'll initially create a linked database and select the resources database. In our case, we are underscore resources. And I like to display resources in the gallery format. So I'm going to add a gallery view here and just name it gallery. And the table view is really easy to edit. So I typically keep a table view, and you'll want to apply all the same filters and other modifications to it. But right now we'll just modify the gallery view. And within the gallery view, I typically sort by the name of the resource. And then for the properties, we don't need a card preview. So we'll choose none for that. And we really don't need to display any other properties because we know that each of these resources are going to be associated with this particular project. So the most important part of this here is going to be to filter for this particular project. So when we create the filter, we'll choose the project property, and we only have one within our projects database, so it's our only option here. So here we have our resources displayed and only the resources that are associated with this project. Now remember, typically you'd be working with almost an unmanageable volume of resources that you'd never want to look at simultaneously. But what this filtered view will do is only display the resources that you're going to be using for this particular project because you've linked the resources to this project using that relation property. So you want to include the resources within this page view of the project. And then most importantly, you want to include the tasks that are associated with the project. So we will create another linked database and choose our underscore tasks database. I like to display tasks as a list. So we'll name this list and create the view. Keep the table view, but make it not default by shifting it down. And so for this list, I'll typically add some properties to display, especially the due date, and the person responsible is visible by default, which is helpful. And then we're going to want to display that checkbox that can be easily checked as well. So we'll rearrange those a little bit to make them look nice. And then I like to filter or sort the database by the due date, DUE. So we'll choose that property for the sort. And then again, most importantly, we want to filter this list to show only the tasks associated with this particular project because we've linked the tasks to the project using that relation property. So remember, typically we'd be working with all tasks from all projects. So when we establish this filter, it's going to show only those associated with this particular project. But right now, those are the only tasks that we have within the tasks database. So I continue to mention that I have this meetings and events database as a representative of all the other databases that you might include. You might have, like I said, contacts and companies and notes. For example, you might have a database of notes, all of which can be related to a project. So you might want to include filtered views of all of those databases within this snapshot of the project. So right now, we'll just do it for meetings and events. So as with all of these, this is going to be a linked database. This time we're choosing _ meetings and events. And we're going to see all of the meetings and events initially, but because we've only related 2 of them to this project, when we add this filter, it is going to only show those 2. So I like to display meetings and events. Of course, a calendar is a great way to show meetings and events, but a list is also a good way to do it. So we'll just add a list view, and we'll move it up to make it the default. And so when we add this filter, and remember, this would be the case with all of our tasks and all of our resources as well, but we only had this project's tasks and resources in place in the other examples. So we're going to filter to show only the meetings and events associated with this project. So when we do that, we see only those 2. So now we have the resources associated with this project, the tasks associated with this project, and the meetings and events. And remember, you could have contacts, you could have organizations, you could have notes, you could have all these other master databases and display only the items that are unique to this project, that are related to this project. And this is what makes Notion so particularly powerful. So one other area I like to add to this project snapshot is just a quick links area where you can include web bookmarks or other helpful items linked to page blocks in a way that makes them easily accessible. It's just a way of kind of including items that you might not have already within your resources database. And I like to put that alongside the resources database in a way that looks really nice. So there we have columns for our quick links and our resources, and then we still have our tasks and our meetings and events in place. So this is a snapshot of the project. This is what we want to see when we open the project page. But when we create each new project, we don't want to have to do everything that we just did. We want to have a template that automatically populates with all of this information. So I just created it within this existing project to demonstrate exactly what it's going to look like populated. But what you would typically do is create all of this within a template. So I'm going to cut all of this information, and I'm going to go back to our projects database, and I'm going to create a new template, and we'll just call it new project. And then I can paste all of that information. So all of this information is going to still be filtered for that placeholder project that we created. So what I need to do is change the filters. And instead of choosing that project, we're going to choose this template. This is a self-referencing filter, and it's actually a new feature of Notion. So now the resources database is going to filter to show only the resources associated with the new project being created. And of course, there are no resources or tasks or meetings and events already associated with this template because it doesn't exist yet. The new project doesn't exist yet. But when you go and implement this template, that creates a new project, and all of these linked databases will be filtered automatically to show the items associated with the new project that you're creating. So this is a really powerful feature. So I'll change each of these filters. So of course, as I just explained, we have no items to actually display within these linked databases yet. So what I'm going to do now is recreate our columns, our nice columns. And that is our new project filter. So now if we go and create a new project using the new project template, I just said filter, I meant template, we can name it project. I just said filter, I meant template. We have our new project XYZ, and we can see that these filters are now filtered for project XYZ. They're automatically filtered for the project that you are creating because they were filtered. It was a self-referencing filter that referenced the template itself. So this is another really powerful feature of Notion for project management, and you can see our project XYZ here. So now when we open our projects, we'll see all of that helpful information. So for this project, because I cut all of the information, it's no longer in place. But when I select that template, boom, there's all of our associated resources, tasks, and meetings and events. So that's what you want to see in the internal page contents of your projects. And remember, this will include other linked databases if you're keeping contacts and organizations and notes in these other master databases. So the last key element of this is going to be to display your projects, your list of projects within contextual dashboards. So I'm not going to detail that process as much, but I want to show you some examples. And I've already got those a little bit configured. So I like to display projects as galleries. And that would be without a page preview. And of course, it's going to include the name of the project. And I also like to include the pillar or the bucket or the area or whatever you're using as your term for category of project. And then displaying that visual progress bar is really nice as well. So I like to place these galleries of projects in useful contexts. So your organization may have kind of an organization home base, a home page. And on that home page, you might want to display all of the projects that are active within the current, their start date and their end date. The start date is before the current date and the end date is afterwards. So you can create a filtered view of them accordingly. And then, of course, if you open any of these gallery cards, you're going to see all of that helpful information about the project from any dashboard where these linked databases are applied. And you'll see that because a select few of those checkboxes are checked, we can see our visual progress bar displaying 42% project progress with 4 of our 10 circles filled. And so that's your home page view. You might want to consider an active projects view there. And then if you have this, of course, areas or buckets or pillars database, you're also going to want to be able to open those buckets, pillars, and areas. And for each one, say you're talking about a client, for example. In this case, if you open the University of North Carolina, go Tar Heels client, you're going to want to see a filtered view of the projects for that client. So you would place this filtered view of projects within that area or within that client page. And so all of the projects that would be included in this gallery would be those associated with that particular client. Of course, if you open it, you would see all that information that is related to it. And then other considerations are personal dashboards. So each member of your team may have a personal dashboard where they have all of the information that are linked to them. That's why we included that team property, because that's going to allow your team members to filter the projects to show only the ones where they're actually within the team. So a personal teammate can display his or her projects on his or her personal homepage by filtering where they fall into that team view. So they could have a gallery on their homepage that only displays the projects where they're on the team. And then the same for tasks. Your personal pages will likely include all of the tasks that are associated with the respective team member. And so that team member can create a linked database, filter to show only the tasks that are assigned to that team member, and then create views according to time or according to pillar, bucket, or area, or however they want to segment it. They can view only the tasks that are associated with them, that are assigned to them, and they can customize those views however they want to. So these are just a few examples of where you can apply projects and tasks, filtered views of them, contextualized views of them within dashboards of your workspace. And so I know that's a lot of information. And like I said, you'll certainly want to reference the recording of this webcast and watch it at your own pace. And I made these templates available for you to duplicate and tinker with. And then there's also that text post on Notion VIP, so that hopefully that gives you plenty to work with. And for now, I will answer any questions that you have. As usual, we're over time. A half hour doesn't give us a whole lot of time. And I am trying to throw less information at you because I know I'm always throwing a lot of information at you. But we will take a few minutes here if you'd like to answer a few questions. And I will start with this Ask a Question feature in Crowdcast. And the first one I see is the $1 million question, which is, when is Notion's API going to be available? And that is not one that I can answer. And all I can say to that is that we're now seeing very tangible evidence that that we're getting much closer. Notion is making hires to facilitate relationships with the third parties that that will be involved in the integrations utilizing the API. So I'm as eager as anyone to see the API. It's going to transform the way that we use Notion, particularly in project management, because you're going to be able to integrate it with your CRM, and you're going to be able to integrate it with your emails and your calendars, and it's going to really bolster this system of project management. But for now, we will continue to sit on the edge of our seats. So we have Ethan asking, would this work for a non-service-based business? So yeah, Ethan, the idea here is that this is a really high-level framework that's really intended to be universally applicable. So this is a framework, and it's important to remember when you're learning all of these strategies and methodologies for Notion, you don't want to keep any of it entirely. You don't want to treat any of it as literal step-by-step directions. It's all kind of principles and philosophies and methodologies, and you want to take the overarching themes and understand those concepts and then tailor them to suit your unique circumstance. So absolutely, this framework could apply to a non-service-based business, but it could also apply to non-businesses. It could apply to any sort of team or individual that's using Notion and using it for any sort of project management. Really, a project is just a series of tasks fundamentally. And so if you've got something you're trying to accomplish by way of completing a series of tasks, then this is going to be a really helpful framework for you. So Fernando asks, I wonder, how do you quickly add tasks to a specific project on the go? And what do you do with single tasks that don't belong to a project? So that's a great question, Fernando, and that is that's a common one, and that gets back to kind of like the overarching kind of methodology that you would use to organize your workspace, drawing from the para methodology. There's a lot of videos about how to adopt para to your workspace, and that bulletproof methodology that I showed you addresses this as well. But generally speaking, just as you include filtered views of your projects in different contextual places throughout your workspace, you can do the same with tasks. So you might include a filtered list of tasks on your organization's homepage, and that you might have different views by project, or you might create just kind of like an inbox view that that allows you to quickly drop them in, and then you might have a task at the end of the day, a recurring task where you assign those inbox tasks to specific projects. What I do, honestly, and this is taken from the Getting Things Done methodology more than para or any other, but I have just an inbox page, and I basically just keep this is my real life inbox page, and I have one note that I've already taken down today, or I'm sorry, I'm not in my shared screen. So here is an inbox page, my real life inbox page, and it includes one note that I've taken down today. So basically, I just have an inbox page, and I have a checklist within it. And so throughout the day, I'm adding items to this inbox page, and at the end of the day, I have a daily wrap up. And basically, with that, I'll take these items that I quickly jot down throughout the day, and apply them to the task database. And the task database, you wouldn't typically go into the full database to do that. What you would do is go into whatever contextual view applies to the task. So if it's a task for your website project that you quickly jot down, for example, if you go into that project where you have that filtered view of tasks, if you add a task using that filtered view, that task is already going to be automatically related to that project, which is a really important point. So if you add a task, I'll just say that again, within a filtered view, then the properties that filter that view are going to be applied to the task. So if you're looking at a project and it's filtered view of tasks, and you add a task, then it's going to be automatically related to that project. I know I just said that 3 times, but it is an important point. So someone's asking about the template in the chat. I will link, for now, I'll just link to this post, and then in the very first paragraph of the post, the template is in place for you. So you can grab that there. And Fernando, you're welcome. Thank you for your awesome question. So let me answer just one more question, and if you have any follow-ups, please feel free to tweet at me. We're always answering questions on Twitter, and then there will likely be a follow-up survey for this. So in that, you'll have an opportunity to indicate any requests for future editions of this webcast, where we can dive in to specific topics. So I'm just going to choose a random question here. How can I create a random ID number for each task? So that is another fantastic question. That's another feature I'm really eager to see in Notion. In particular, I want to be able to use a formula to generate the value within the title property. So for example, if I have like a name and a time created property, and a relation property that indicates the bucket of the item, I want to be able to merge those using a formula and apply that automatically to the title. So right now you can only manually populate the title value. So what I'll typically do is I'll have a formula property that generates whatever value that I'd want to use in the title, and then you can just easily copy and paste it. But in terms of generating a random ID, what you can do is there are a few different routes that you can take. So that date created property, there's a date created property, and it's automatically populated with the exact time, I think down to the millisecond that the new item within the database is created. So that's basically going to be unique for every item. So you can use that as a unique ID. There's a lot of reasons why you would want to use a unique ID. I really appreciate the question because a proper database does have a unique ID. And I wish that it could be automated within the title property, but Notion knows that. So yeah, there's a few different options you can do. You can utilize the date created property. You can also use if you that's probably going to be your best approach. And now Siri's talking to me. So that must be my cue to sign off. But thank you so much for tuning in here. I'm seeing some nice feedback in the chat and some questions that we weren't able to address. But let's continue the conversation. Keep an eye out for those other resources, and find me on Twitter, or you can reply to the Notion VIP newsletter if you hit any roadblocks. And I will see you elsewhere on the web. And everybody keep safe.